I was in your spot just last year, and I think one of the cool things is that all this week you guys have gotten to see what I hope is some of your academic heroes talk to you. I certainly have gotten to see some of my academic heroes this week, and that's the great thing about this experience. But what I'm going to show you today is that I'm a little bit closer to where you are right now, and kind of show you my research journey and the steps that I've been taking over the past 6 years since I began grad school, and what I think about with research, and some of the challenges that I face, and some of the challenges probably that you face, and the questions that I ask myself as I go through research. I changed the title from what it originally was. I am going to talk about one of my studies, but I figured I'd take a step back since we are kind of talking about the bigger picture here, and talk about some of these bigger challenges that we deal with every time that we're thinking about research, and what are the bigger impacts of these studies that we do, rather than just narrowing in on the one thing. So my new title, Technology and Relationships is Complicated, a little play on Facebook status update. So finding my path. And what this is about is, when we go to grad school, we have all of these ideas about what we want to study. I can tell you that when I started my master's program, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea that I would be studying anything related to the internet, let alone that I'd be studying social media or Facebook or relationships. I had actually been rejected from University of Maryland twice. So I finally accepted me. Third time is a charm. I was a calm undergrad. I had been working as an editor. I wanted to go back to grad school. I thought I wanted to do it in sociology. Had gotten rejected there, and I finally was like, okay, I'll go back to comm. I got rejected by the Maryland comm department, and finally went back to Georgetown. And then it was my second year at Georgetown, and they're like, what is your thesis on first week of school? And I'm like, crap, I have to pick a thesis topic? Like, this is the rest of my life. I need to pick a thesis topic. So I'm like, I'll do something on the internet, Of course, big topic. But it's this idea of like, I have all these big ideas. Well, the internet is impacting the way we do things. Okay, that's a big idea. But then you have to figure out, well, how do I get from that big idea, these big ideas I have about something, to meaningful results? We all have these ideas about relationships between whatever variables we're interested in, but getting from this point A to point B is not as easy as it seems. And to all of you who have yet to write a dissertation, I will tell you this right now: there is such a thing as too big of an idea. You're going to learn when you're writing your dissertation that no matter what you think about your dissertation being this magnum opus, this grand thing, it's not going to be. It's the beginning. It is not the end. It is the beginning of a stream of research, and you shouldn't think of it as this kind of huge thing. But so this big idea, how do I break it down? So one way to do it is to think about, what is my research question? You think about this every time that you're starting a new research project, but I think you should do this when you are just as a researcher, and you should reevaluate this as you go and you evolve as a scholar. What is my main research question? Who am I as a researcher? What are my main kind of goals, and what are the questions that I'm asking? So like for me, I would say right now as a researcher, these are kind of where I sit. I sit at the center of these kind of three main constructs or ideas, where communication practices and this idea of audience and this idea of privacy, these are all big ideas in and of themselves. And I sit somewhere in the middle. And most of my research that I do is driven by questions that somewhere fall in that middle. But it's always a good idea to sit down and think about it. And one thing I did as a grad student, and I still do today, is I'll write on Post-its these big ideas I have, and I'll put them on the wall or something like that, so that when I'm sitting, I might look at them and just think about them. And when you're all, diving really deep into your dissertation or just a study, and you're really focused on this one thing, it's really nice to step back, to be able to think about the big picture, and to be able to think about your research in such a way as not, I am doing a study of how people use Facebook for purpose X to get outcome Y, but more of how do these communication practices help people develop more meaningful relationships, or how do they help them, when they are unable to interact in other offline environments, or these kinds of bigger picture ideas. So that is the first challenge we have as researchers, thinking about where our research falls. The second challenge I would say we have as researchers is narrowing. And again, as grad students, this is the problem I think that as grad students you probably have the most. You go to your advisor and you say, oh, I have this great idea for my dissertation. Your advisor looks at it and says, okay, that's a good idea. Now go and, cut out this and this and this and come back to me. Make it more manageable. So this idea of I have this idea about technology and relationships where I can narrow this down in multiple ways. So I could narrow it down in terms of the technology. I could focus on a specific technology. I could choose to just focus on Facebook, which if you have followed any of the MSU research, we tended to focus on Facebook. I could choose to focus on specific types of relationships. Things like look at romantic versus casual relationships. Look at specific types of network characteristics. A lot of the work that Bernie does that kind of things. So that's another challenge we focus in research. Several people have noted the challenges of collecting data. It's hard to collect data, especially when we're doing data collection and you're using social media and all of these different online sites. I know Cliff went over some of these, and probably some other people did, but in my 4 years at MSU, just doing research with Facebook, we probably faced nearly every data collection challenge that you could probably have when it came to Facebook. Scott Golder, for those of you who know him, he is co-editing a special issue of Cyber Psychology that is specifically on methods in social media. I don't know when it's coming out. We're thinking of submitting something just about our experiences of doing this. We didn't get around to it, but probably coming out next year, but I think it'll be a good issue. So, some of the challenges you face when you're doing this is just picking the right method. So this goes back to figuring out what my question is. Does my method match my question? You can't just pick any old method. Certain methods work for certain questions and certain don't. Reliability of self-reports. So sometimes perceptual data is good, sometimes it's not. So Maura Burke has done lots of research with Facebook server data. She found that people are extremely accurate when they are asked to report how many Facebook friends they have. So you ask them about how many Facebook friends do you have, and then you look at the server level data. And the reliability is above 0.9. Even the correlation is above 0.9. You ask them about how much time they spend on the site, they are extremely unreliable. So if that's something that is important to your analysis, you probably don't want to rely on self-reports. So that's just one example of when self-reports might be bad. In terms of service, like Cliff is saying, data scraping, don't do it on Facebook anymore. Depends on the site, what you can and cannot take from a site. Facebook is starting to work with some researchers. Twitter seems to be allowing more researchers back in again after they kind of shut everything down. Differences across populations of users. The way we see this as a big problem is that largely within psychology, we see it within the field of communication, and several other fields, they tend to rely on student samples for everything. Well, guess what? College students use technologies in vastly different ways than other populations. Not for everything, but for a lot of things. So then you can't generalize to other populations. So it's important to, one, if you're doing research with college students, acknowledge this in your limitations. But two, to undergo research that does use these other populations. And this is difficult. With a site like Facebook or with Twitter, because the adoption rates are increasing among these populations, it is getting easier. You just have to realize that, yes, the convenience of getting a student sample going to the classrooms at your university, you need to just work a little harder to get it. But It's research that needs to be undertaken, and we need to be willing to put in that extra work to get those populations. Researching less popular sites and finding that population can be difficult, because then it's usually a convenient sample. Doing research on E2, Cliff was, again, talking about the difficulties in doing that. You know, how do you find the users and then get the users to agree to participate in research when it's not a site that's widely used? Something that we've seen with Facebook is that these sites are constantly evolving. So at least in journals, it's not so much of an issue with conferences. It's a 2-year process often. So I publish a paper on specific Facebook features. By the time the journal publishes it, those features either don't exist or they've evolved to such a degree that the paper, if not obsolete, it doesn't really make sense anymore. So my paper doesn't really matter in the field. So how do you deal with that? And again, it's kind of taking a step back and not talking about, well, Facebook's feature, but looking at it within the broader spectrum of these technologies and how these affordances can allow us to do things. And then getting a representative sample can be really hard. So we did a study in which we were trying to get Facebook adult users for interviews, and we decided to use Facebook ads. Has anybody here used Facebook ads to recruit? Did you have success, Patrick?
I got 0.
Okay.
Over 2 months.
Do you remember how much you had to pay for your 0 participants?
No, I didn't pay anything.
Oh, you didn't pay anything?
I chose the method like pay by click.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
I don't think that would happen.
Yeah, because you can pay by click or pay by view or something, or
Yeah, the view is about 100, so.
yeah. Anybody else use that? Oh gosh. So we used that. We were able to get, I think, 30 people to take the little screener survey, which led to 17 interviews, and we spent. It ended up being like $20 a person that we had to pay just to do it. I mean, it was.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a lot of money.
So for me, I wasn't bad about the experience because at the same time, I don't want to see my, students in my university only look at the ads, and just click everything.
Yeah.
I just make sense of it.
Yeah. So this is a balance. Somebody like Pure Internet has the ability to spend the $40,000 to $50,000 that they spend every time that PRSA does one of those national phone surveys. Even that has its inherent problems because they have this huge, they have this increasing bias with the non-response. But, that's more representative than a student sample. But then, you have this, you're trying to get a representative sample, but you can't get enough people. So how do you balance that? That's another challenge.
But, compared to battle days, $20 a person doesn't sound too bad. Because I spent more than $10,000 to get a sample on paper by mailing things to people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but this is also, it also took us 3 months, I think, to get those 20 people.
which actually doesn't sound all that bad.
It's like a lifetime.
Uh,
In internet time, it was a lifetime. So, to kind of echo some of the things Libby was saying, there's a fourth challenge, and that's analyzing data. And also to echo what Cliff was saying. One, you can't know every method. And two, what Libby was talking about was, asking for help. Don't hold on to everything and be afraid to ask for help. Data analysis is hard. You're not going to know every method. A lot of times you're not going to be an expert on what you're trying to do. So one of the challenges that you face is you might have this data set and you might not be the expert. So who do you turn to? If you're collaborating with people, somebody on your team might be the expert on that data analysis. So have them do it. If you're doing your dissertation, it might be the question of, do I have the time to learn this new method and do the specific analysis, or do I do a simpler analysis, and finish my dissertation, or these kinds of questions that you have to ask yourself when you're doing it. So that's the fourth one, and that's just something that you have to answer on a personal basis. So those are kind of 4 challenges that I think that we deal with every time that we're dealing with research. So now I'm going to kind of talk about one of my research projects and how I deal with those 4 challenges. Does anybody recognize this picture?
Yes.
So our dear friend Goffman, who I've heard multiple times, this is from his book cover presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Big fan of the book. So his work on self-presentation kind of guided one of my studies that was on context collapse. And I'll get into what context collapse is in a minute. But so my main research question for this study was how context collapse impacts our use of and outcomes that we can get from using social network sites. So what context collapse is, he talks about this idea of selective self-presentation. So we all know what self-presentation is. It's how we present ourselves. Selective self-presentation is this idea that we highlight certain traits, we minimize other traits, and that varies depending on who our audience is. So one way to look at this, and to use a real-life example that some of you who can remember back about 5 years might remember. Let's say you have one audience of coworkers, and you present as, you're a bank intern. You dress nice in a suit when you go to work. You have another audience, your friends. You go to a Halloween party. You dress up like a fairy. Your name happens to be Kevin Colvin. You live in New York. The problem happens, you have some bank friends and some other friends who come together, say, on a site like Facebook. And this is context collapse. The 2 distinct contexts, people from these contexts come together in a situation. It doesn't have to be online. Somebody from work and somebody from this party could meet in a grocery store and they just happen to know each other. But this is the idea of context collapse. This is a real story. Valleywag in 2007 made a big deal out about this because this guy, the picture on the left isn't of him, it just looked like him, but he wrote a letter to his boss saying, I have a family emergency, I have to go home for the next few days. But he wanted to go to this Halloween party. Well, one of his coworkers at the bank was his Facebook friend, saw the picture, sent it to their mutual boss. His mutual boss then sent him an email saying, basically, you're fired, P.S. nice wand. So, yes, this is what happens when, your friends from different types of environments come together. This is a potential negative impact of context collapse.
I just find knocked on me, then
Probably not. Let's use friend in quotes here. This is the problem with Facebook. It has destroyed our understanding of the word friend. So context collapse, like I said, is not limited to online environments. The kind of quintessential offline example of context collapse is a wedding. Everybody's been to a wedding, probably. This is the ultimate experience where people from all different facets of your life suddenly have to come together for a big party, and it's very awkward, and you as the bride or groom then have to find a way to self-present that is somehow consistent for everyone. And you go with your college friends and you're partying, but then your grandparents are right there, so you can't party quite as hard and do whatever. And then hi grandma, So it's managing all of these different versions of the self as you move around the room. The thing with technology, what technology and affordances of technology does is it tends to attenuate this process. And the way it does this, in the case of Facebook, in the case of Twitter, is that it provides this convenient organization of your connections, Facebook friends, the Twitter followers, this listing where it brings all of these connections together. And this, in my opinion, is kind of going back to the big picture of why this is important beyond Facebook, why this matters in the big picture. So technology is changing, or exacerbating existing structures and processes of how we interact with people in our network and the outcomes that are derived from this. So, I don't know how many people will get that joke. No one? So this is my network, and the idea is that the pink circles are different clusters, so they represent different groups of people. So for example, there's a college cluster, a high school cluster, a grad school cluster, a Michigan State cluster. That little group of 4 people who's not connected to anybody else was a grad school study abroad. But the idea that I have all of these distinct groups that are connected by maybe 1 or 2 people, I have this kind of middle cluster that is more heavily connected to the different groups. But I do know these people in kind of more distinct environments. And when I'm interacting on Facebook, when I post a status update, I'm sharing it generally with everyone. So I need, if I'm actually thinking about it, I need to think about, well, I have all these different audiences, and how do I self-present? Do I need to worry about, will this group like what I'm saying? Will this group, will they have a problem with it? Most people don't think about it like that. I do, because I'm hypersensitive about these things. But so I think there are kind of 3 ways in which context collapse can affect the way we use technology. The first would be the strengths of weak ties argument. So Granovetter, his argument about the strengths of weak ties. If you haven't read that article, you should definitely read it. I think it's just useful, even if that's not in your field of study. And that's the idea that Facebook creates this very large network of people. Most of them are weak ties. They're going to be able to provide us potentially with useful, non-redundant information. So if we have a need, he always used the example of when someone was looking for a job. But this type of information that our strong ties, who have the same information as us, might not have. So I have an information need. I post it to Facebook. And then somebody in my network might have the answer, and they might be able to respond. The thing about Facebook is it allows for a very kind of quick transmission of information, and it allows even weak ties who might not be willing to actually pick up a phone and call you. That's a much heavier cost to them to do so. They might be willing to type in a few words. Well, go look at this website or something like that. Another potential effect of context collapse relates to privacy. So people might actually engage in the privacy controls that the site provides. They might then segment their audience. They might try to recreate the boundaries that they have offline to restore this structure, and that way they can create the differentiated self-presentations that they do in other environments. Finally, it's this idea of lowest common denominator, which I pull from Bernie Hogan's work, which is this idea that in this environment, when we have all of these different types of people, we're only going to post things that we think are applicable to everybody. So if I have even one person as a Facebook friend who I think I might offend with a post, I'm just not going to post it. So the problem with this last approach is that it can dramatically limit the types of content we're willing to share. And when we're thinking about, well, what are the resources that can be gained from using social network sites? If you think about, well, what do people at Michigan State study? We study social capital. So that's a problem. So how does context collapse potentially affect our use of social network sites and outcomes? Let's break this down into its parts. Let's first talk about the outcomes. Outcomes could be thought of in terms of resources. So resources can be social capital. Social capital, Nicole Ellison, my advisor, always talks about it as the original friends with benefits. Social capital is the resources, the benefits that we get from interacting with members of our social network. This can be things like instrumental support, social support. It can be a broadened world perspective. It can be new ideas. It can be novel information. But what we found is that through research, mainly from our team, from research by people at Facebook like Morberg, we found that there are positive associations between characteristics of people's use of Facebook and social capital. So usually, the more someone is engaged with a site, the more they're using it, the higher their perceived social capital. So going back to that idea of lowest common denominator, if I'm not posting that much because I'm worried about offending or somehow annoying people in my feed, one thing that we've recently found is that, and this kind of just carries a lot of face validity, in order to accrue social capital, if social capital is what I get from interactions with my social network, well, my network is not going to know I have a resource need unless I am willing to disclose that need to them. So, therefore, we need to be disclosing to get to that social capital. So if we're following the lowest common denominator approach and we're not really making that many disclosures, then it's going to be all the harder for us to then accrue social capital. Next, we have to think about privacy. And I imagine there might be a question or two about privacy because I hear it keep coming up. It's always a fun topic to talk about. So privacy concerns, there are two parts about privacy I'm going to talk about. Privacy concerns certainly can impact people's use of these sites. Privacy concerns can be broken up into various types of categories, but I'm just breaking into two. It can be concerns about who's in my network. So do I trust everyone in my network? Who is my network made of? And then concerns about kind of the publicness of the information that's being shared. So if I have these high privacy concerns, research has shown that then I'm less likely to make disclosures. So this is mainly work by Fred Stutzman. The higher concerns I have, the less I am willing to disclose. So that said, if I'm willing to use these privacy settings, so maybe I use this friend list feature, which is a lot like circles. A lot of people aren't aware of it, but it's just like circles. It existed before circles, which allows people to create these kind of artificial walls and then distribute content to separate lists. Well, maybe then if I'm doing that, that can kind of mitigate these concerns and allow me to then make these disclosures and get the social capital. So that's what this study was all about. How are these kind of four main variables related? Privacy, disclosures, audience, and social capital. So audience, I think, is probably one of the most poorly operationalized variables out there. And if anybody can give me a good operationalization of how people have done this in this kind of research, I would love to hear it. In most of the research, looking at this kind of thing, people do the number of friends people have on a site or the number of followers people have. And while that's all well and good, it's very unidimensional. There's all kinds of reasons why, you shouldn't just use that. For example, people like friend whoring and all those kinds of things, that it kind of doesn't accurately represent people's actual audience.
What is it?
Friend whoring? That comes from it comes from Donath and Boyd 2004. So it's not my term. You can thank them.
Wait, what is it though, actually?
What, friend whoring? Oh, it's just this idea that you're collecting friends on a site solely to inflate your number because you seem more popular when you have more people. Yeah. So, friend whoring. It was used on Friendster. So I see audience as kind of these three interrelated constructs. So one, network size. How many people are in my network? Yes, that is important. Two, we have to think about intimacy or relational closeness. How close am I with these people on my network? So I'm going to have this variation of tie strength. I'm going to have people who I'm very close with. I'm going to have people who I'm very weak with. I'm going to have this range in between. And diversity. I'm going to have people from all different aspects of my life. I'm going to have people who are from these different categories of friends, and that's kind of getting at the context collapse issue. These different contexts represented. So that's how I conceptualized and then operationalized audience in this study. Privacy. Privacy is another tough one. When I think of privacy, I love Erwin Altman. He's my guy when it comes to privacy. He says privacy is the selective control of access to the self, and we regulate that through social interactions. I love that he talks about regulating privacy through interaction, and that we can regulate, that we can just control this. He also talks about controlling it by doing things like shutting a door. I can control my privacy. If I'm having a private conversation with somebody in a room, I can shut the door and then shut out the rest of the people who are in the house. But you can regulate your social interactions on Facebook, for example, by going into the privacy settings and changing the privacy settings. Again, we can break this into privacy concerns and privacy controls. And then there's all these different things that become a part of it. I mean, there's just so many different things, and this, I think, becomes problematic. I think other people have brought this up, of the very complex, increasing complexity surrounding privacy. I've done some qualitative research in which, with people who are very concerned about privacy, who have done pretty much all of these different things to control access. And you got to wonder, at what point are you spending so much time trying to control access that either one, you're losing any enjoyment in the site, or two, you're spending more time controlling than you are using, and then you're losing out on the benefits to doing that. So then I was thinking, sites like Facebook, I love Facebook for trying to make privacy so granular and to give me so many options. But that's because I am obsessed with privacy and I spend so much time trying to learn about it. But I'm not the normal user. So if you're trying to balance the two, I really think it's impossible. And I think Facebook has utterly failed at this. Because we want a site to be usable, and we want the privacy to be accessible and usable, and have the average person be able to go in and know what they're doing, and know where an update is going, and what their photo album, who can see it, and all these things. I just don't think that these things match up. Because for usability, you want something that is simple and that has a few clicks, and you can, it's very intuitive. But when you look at these privacy settings, and just go to your account and look at the privacy, it's many, many clicks and many, many settings. And if you want to try to set up a friend list, I dare you to try to do it in less than 10 clicks. Even I have a hard time finding it now. It's so buried. So it's very frustrating that they, say that they want to help users, make things as private as they want to, and then the technology is so complicated that I think your average user would have a hard time with it. If we talk about disclosures, you think about disclosures in social media, what's the first thing you think about, the most common disclosure that people make fun of on a social media site? Bathroom, what? Relationship status? Meals. Yeah, meals. So, yes, people tend to post about all kinds of boring stuff, bowel movements, I mean. So, really I just want SpongeBob in my presentation. But, a lot of people say, who cares? Why are you posting this stuff to Twitter or to Facebook? Nobody cares. Well, the thing is from a communications perspective, these types of disclosures do at some level matter, and we can analyze them, even having a drink with breakfast. And I'm sure she means orange juice, minus the vodka. But there are ways to look at disclosures besides just counting them or something like that. So one way to do it is to look at what Wheelis and Gross call the general disclosiveness scale, and they looked at these different characteristics of disclosures, and so we can look at them, and we can look at things like, one, the amount, which is what most people do when they're looking at disclosures. How many disclosures are people making? Yeah, that makes sense. But we can look at things like the intimacy or the depth. We can look at the conscious intention. How much thought is the person putting into a post? When I write a status update, am I actually thinking in my head like about the wording of it, about who's going to see it, about these kinds of factors? The honesty, the positivity. Positivity is a big thing on Facebook. If you look at Facebook research about the content of Facebook updates, they always tend to be much more positive than negative. People don't like seeing negative Facebook updates. So we can look at these kinds of characteristics of disclosures, even about breakfast. And social capital. Hopefully all of you have heard about social capital by this point from Cliff's mouth or somebody else's mouth. But bridging social capital, like I said, is about this idea of access to new ideas, novel information, diverse worldviews. Bonding social capital is much more about inclusion, it's about instrumental, it's about social emotional support. We tend to always use the Williams Internet Social Capital Scales, ISCS, from 2006. There are some critiques about them, so we're always looking for new ways to measure it. I figured I would include some social capital in action items. People do ask questions on Facebook. I'm getting some critique on that recently. So here would be an example of bridging social capital in action. I had a foot problem in January, or in April, sorry, and I asked Facebook if anybody had a similar foot problem, because none of my close friends ran, but I knew I had Facebook friends who ran. So I posted on Facebook, like, hey, my foot is hurting here, I'm running a 10K in a week. Like, should I be worried about this? And I got 11 comments back, basically going through like, well, is it this, where does it hurt, da, 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 da. So that would be an example of me taking advantage of my weak ties, because I knew my strong ties weren't going to be able to help me and give me this information that I would have a hard time getting otherwise from my close ties. Bonding social capital. This is the cutest dog in the world. His name is Rufus. My poor little Rufus tore his ACL in January. I was very distraught, so I posted to Facebook about it. And I had a lot of people posting like, oh, he'll be okay, So, it's just me upset, and, I was seeking kind of emotional and support, and most of my close friends and, other dog lovers would post support. So this is how kind of bridging and bonding may function on a site like Facebook. So what I did was I did structural equation modeling. For anybody who's unfamiliar with structural equation modeling, one of the benefits of that versus other types of analyses is it allows for multiple dependent variables. So you can just draw a model, draw the paths. If you're using a program like Amos, you literally draw circles, you draw the paths, and you can create latent variables, which is combinations of multiple items which feed into a single variable. And you can do things like CFA, confirmatory factor analysis on it. So I did that, and I'm going to kind of do a very high-level telling of the analysis. I'm not going to go into anything really deep with it. But what I found was that when looking at audience, so this is size and diversity of people's networks. So as people's friends on Facebook, as that network got bigger and more diverse, so they had, they had friends from high school, they had faculty members, this was with grad students, they had faculty in their network, they had people from their church in their network, they had a greater number of people. As it was getting larger and more diverse, they were more likely to use the friend list feature. That was the privacy settings I used. They were making a greater number of disclosures. They were more positive in those disclosures. and they were more intimate in those disclosures, and they thought about what they were posting more. They also had higher perceived bridging and bonding of social capital. So as your network got bigger and more diverse, you saw positive increases in all of these factors. When we add in the privacy concerns and the path to disclosures, things are a little trickier. Privacy concerns was negatively related, as we might expect. The greater the privacy concerns, the less you're going to post, the less intimate you're going to be, and the less consciously intended you're going to be. Positivity wasn't included in it. With the privacy settings to disclosures, the only thing that was related was conscious intention. So if I used the friend list feature, I thought more about what I was going to post, which kind of makes sense, because if I'm segmenting my audience and I have all these lists, I need to think about, well, who am I going to send this update to? So that might be one way of explaining it. And then finally, for the disclosures, as the amount of disclosures increased, as the conscious intention increased, and as the positivity increased, I perceived I had greater social capital. So depth was unrelated. So I realize that's a lot to take in, but kind of the main takeaways here from that model. We can say that one's network size and who the people are in your network is related to, one, how you engage. So the characteristics of my disclosures. It's going to have an impact on what I say on the site. It's also going to impact my perceived access to specific types of resources as measured by the social capital scales. I think more importantly, and this is kind of looking at the disclosures scale, disclosures relationship, it's not just who you're connected to, so it's not just their network size, but it's the characteristics of those disclosures that that affect your perceptions of access to resources. So in 5 of the 8 models that I ran, the link from disclosures to social capital, the beta was stronger than the beta from audience to disclosures. So disclosures was having a much stronger impact on the model. So in a way you could say that by making a disclosure on a site like Facebook, it's a way of signaling to your network, hey, I'm here. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of traffic happening on these sites. But by posting a status update, it might be a way to remind your network, hey, remember I exist, one, if you're not somebody who posts often or if they have a lot of friends, hey, I'm here, and hey, I might have something that's useful to share. If I'm sharing a link that people might like, if I'm sharing useful information, they might be more likely to reciprocate. So it's signaling my presence in the network. It's signaling to them in a way that they might be willing to write something back. They might be willing to do something for me down the line. And then finally, these site features may help mitigate context collapse. The interesting thing here was that lowest common denominator would argue that as the size and diversity of your network went up, the amount of disclosures should go down, but I found the opposite. So it could be that because some people are using these features, they're finding a way around that approach. So maybe if they didn't have that feature, they might just post less. But they're finding that, hey, if I can use these features, I can segment my audience, and I can kind of get around having to worry about offending somebody or something like that. It was a minority of people who used this. It was right around 20% who actually said they used friend lists to segment their audience. It also has implications for design. I am not a design person, but I certainly see ways in which Facebook can be better designed, especially when it comes to things like how to set up privacy, to make it more accessible. When you think about this diverse user base, people who are not as technologically savvy, When we did those interviews, when we used Facebook to recruit those people and we had the horrible time, most of those people were over 50. And one of the things we talked about them with was how they use the site and, what types of troubles they had using the site. And one of the things they reiterated again and again was, well, I post an update, I'm not sure who it's going to, or I might not post an update because I'm scared of who's going to see it. Or I had somebody call me and say, why can this person access this? And I didn't realize that I'd set it to public. So this idea of like just this low literacy, this Facebook literacy, I guess you could call it, when it comes to using these features. And there's simple ways to change design of the site to kind of deal with those kinds of things that I think could be dealt with. So coming full circle, you just start with this big idea that you have. For me, it's always about this relationship between technology and relationships. For you, I'm sure it could be something different. And then you have to deal with all of these different challenges that I went through. One of the things about any type of research is that when you finish a research study, you should be left with new questions. It should inspire you to do your next study. You shouldn't just finish that study and be like, okay, everything's answered. I'm done with that. I'm done. It's all good. Hopefully it inspires you. It leaves you with looking to do that next study, whatever it's going to be. Another important thing that I encourage you all to do is to really push boundaries. So don't just say, oh, well, this person has this measure. It doesn't really fit exactly what I'm looking for, but hey, it's been validated, and so I'll just use it. Don't just accept what's out there and force it into your research. If something doesn't fit, make something that works for you, and then push to make and see if that's better, because it might be. And then I realize this is somewhat non-related, but I just was thinking about it, and this is something that comes up again and again. I just wanted to end on this. Non-significance is not a bad thing in any research. A lot of people come up and will say to me like, oh, I just analyzed my data and nothing's significant. And I'm like, okay, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. What if non-significance is important? What if other researchers have always found significance, and your non-significance means that there's something else going on? So, I realize that's kind of tangential, but hopefully that helps you kind of as you do your research. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yeah.
You talked about privacy and security as being a balance.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the work that sees that as maybe not something really balancing against each other, or the ways that can increase both? And do you think that that's actually possible?
Can you give me an example of somebody who is in that?
Yeah, so the Usable Privacy and Security Lab at CMU.
Okay.
There's a lot of work on that, and some of the things are like, asking people questions about how comfortable they would feel with disclosure papers, and then suggesting sets of comprehensible rules, and maybe even helping them figure out how to change something in a particular direction that makes it more usable. But
no, but I would love if you could send me a link to the lab, because I'm not familiar with that. A lot of the work, a lot of my kind of thinking on this, again, originates with Altman, and then was forwarded also by Sandra Petronio, who is the person behind communications privacy management theory, since my background's in communications. So she is the one who kind of does this. Well, there's privacy and there's disclosures, and they're kind of these two incompatible things.
Yeah, that's sort of widely held, but that's actually one of the sort of core focuses of our program, is that maybe they're not.
Oh, yeah, I would love to learn more.
Social capital scales, something I thought about too, because I really don't like the Williams scales, because they separate online and offline.
Yeah.
Which, even conceptually, when I piloted it, you just can't interpret it. Do you know someone online who can blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
So I have a suggestion, but how did you guys do it? Like, how did that work? Because I couldn't.
So we have never at MSU we've never done the online offline distinction.
Right.
So the early Facebook research that Nicole Cliff and Chip did,
You just
well they did at MSU. So they were doing this localized context. In recent years we've moved more toward thinking about it either within your social network in general. So we say like think about your social network. This includes people, your neighbors, blah, blah, coworkers, everyone in your social network. Or think about your Facebook friends. Think about interactions you have with them both on the site and in other locations. But trying to get them to think of just that network as a subset of their entire social network. And
But you use the same questions?
we use the same items, and we just don't, it's pretty easy to change the wording because it's,
Sure.
from the online.
My suggestion, which I did do, but I haven't published it yet, I did present at ASA, is using regular social sports scales. This is sort of this discussion we've been having about the internet, not a separate world issues.
Yeah.
What I just found validated pretty long history of social sports scales, which correspond very much conceptually to everything we're looking at for social capital. And they have, it comes a lot from the health literature where they look at social sport. And I think they're a little better than, I can send the link. And this is something important to think about because finding the right questions,
Yes.
social capital, there's a lot that's hinging on it. And I'm asking, maybe people can chime in, is look for regular social capital scales.
Yeah.
Don't
So
look for internet scales, don't look for this, because the questions should be things like, well, if you needed X.
yeah, so one I've used is Katrona and Russell's social provision scales,
Okay.
which is 5 dimensions of social support. The one thing that kind of leaves out is more of this bridging.
Bridging.
Yeah, so
always, 'cause
I
that's
found lots of stuff that kind of fits onto bonding, the dimensions of bonding, but we've had a hard time in things like the position generator, the name generator that more of the sociologists,
Right.
Lynn and all of those have used for bridging. We've had very bad success, we've had no success trying to use those and getting those to actually be predictive of anything.
The
So,
bridging is more of a challenge. The thing with social support is, if you think about social capital, social support is what bonding social capital produces. So you're literally measuring conceptually its consequence. So I think social support fits perfectly to bonding, and yes,
Yeah.
bridging is a bit of a challenge and something
yeah,
we
I agree.
should all think about.
Yeah.
Zainab, are you talking about the interpersonal social support scale from Cohen?
Yes, Cohen. It's a very good one. I encourage people to look at it. It's got a college version to it's validated, has a long history, so you can use it to compare with a lot of stuff. It has a lot of common with the Williams because that's kind of the literature he's drawing on, but it's a more, like then you can talk to other literatures
Yeah.
and say, this is what we got from Facebook. Okay, that's the one. I'll look for it and see if I can.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Maybe to play devil's advocate, but when you talk about privacy and security, and then you talk about Facebook, if someone really has something and they have a privacy or security concern about posting something, why would they or should they post it to Facebook in the first place? And if we give them more options and make it more clear to them how they can be private, that's not that. Don't they just give them the false impression that they could actually be private when in fact government and companies and everyone can see it?
Well, okay, so one, I think we're kind of muddying privacy and security here, and I'm not a computer scientist, and security and, for example, computer science is a very different beast than I think, when some people use privacy and security interchangeably. I'm talking about, people having concerns about their privacy or using privacy settings, which I think is a little bit different than at least my conceptualization of security. When you're using privacy, it might be, so for a college student, for example, I've done focus groups with college students. One college student told me she wanted to post pictures from spring break. She hadn't told her parents she went on spring break. But she wanted all her friends to see it. So she blocked the album from her parents. So that would be an example. It's not an issue of, not wanting the government to see. It's not this like big security issue. It's more of a, again, managing different versions of the self. Really fear of being grounded, but more than anything else. But this idea of, managing self and keeping those identities consistent with the different versions of self. If I want to, if I'm kind of dumb enough to want to mouth off about my boss, and I want to do that on Facebook, well, I better damn well, block that post from my boss. Not that I would ever do that, Jenny.
I would just say it in front of everyone.
But but I think there are plenty of examples when it's not a security issue. When I post things that are local, I send them to a local list. I don't send, if I'm sending something about something happening around Maryland, I don't want to post that where my friends in California are going to see it, because I don't feel like they need to see it. So, I think there are plenty of issues of when people would be wanting to use these types of things, when it's not an issue of security, when it's more of just like managing.
Right. But shouldn't we, when we talk about creating this interface, or you said you're not a designer, but there are things to be designed, wouldn't it be necessary to make clear that, yes, your father might not be able to see it, but there's still a lot of people who really...
Sure. And if you are really serious about you don't want somebody to see it, maybe you shouldn't post at all. And that's what Eric Schmidt, I think, said in one of his famous foot and mouth interviews when he talked about kids changing their name at 18 and all those kinds of things. He also said, well, if you don't want anybody to see it, just don't post it. Yeah. But you know what? That's not going to stop people in the end. People like to share content. Otherwise, these sites wouldn't be popular in the first place. But
actually, it was a little bit different. He said it was kind of the opposite, right? He said if you have something to hide, or if you have some behavior that you don't want to post, maybe you shouldn't be doing that behavior.
Yeah, did you say that?
It was kind of the opposite. For example,
if you have something to hide, you shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Yeah,
if you're LGBT and it's dangerous for you to disclose that
maybe
in Wyoming, maybe you should just be straight. I think is
gosh,
that's
that's much worse than what I
just think you're being a little too generous.
Oh, that is much worse.
And the fact that the service does encourage this sense of selective sharing.
Sure.
Is in the hacker or security community, it's essentially a honeypot for personal disclosure. It gets you to do it. And then I thought your first example was a good one. Really, we ought to be saying to people, don't tell Facebook almost anything except the lowest common denominator of things, and don't use those selective sharing features, because they don't really work. Because all it takes is, it's not about the ACLs, it's about the access control list, it's about the human bridge. Somebody is granted access, and then they're going to repost it, and they're going to tell, it's probably true that when it comes to not doing things that you shouldn't do, if your parents told you not to do it, you shouldn't do it, as a parent, I should say. So it seems very dangerous that you're going to go to the party and tell your boss that you've gone to a family event instead, and then believe that you can actually upload those photos. Further, you shouldn't go to the party in the first place, because it's not the photos that you took that you uploaded, it's the photos that somebody else took that they uploaded and tagged with your name, and so you're not going to contain
You're playing with fire regardless. I always thought it was interesting that Google Plus, when you repost something that somebody shared with a circle, it just pops up with a warning like, hey, this person only shared this with a limited number of people, just be warned about this. Whereas Twitter wouldn't allow you originally to retweet something from a private account. I think there's a way of, besides copying it and doing it, but the way that different technologies deal with this kind of private to public path. But yeah.
Yeah, you talked about limited use of the friend list feature.
Mm-hmm.
In my view, that seems because it's so darn hard to use that feature, especially a few years back before Google Plus really came out. Like, they really buried, and you can't, it used to be you couldn't even see what list somebody's on or add them to a list when looking at their profile. You couldn't see the list. You had to go through 10 clicks to get there.
Yeah, this is my gripe with lists. I've been a list user for a long time, and it was so buried. And then Google Plus comes out, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, this is this new amazing feature!" And I actually wrote this blog post, and it was like, this has been around forever. This is how you get to the lists. And the problem is when you have this network embedded and you have to then go back and retroactively add everybody to it, the time commitment and the involvement and energy to it, it's, is it worth it to do that versus with Google Plus when you're doing it as you're adding people and you're just immediately doing it, it's much easier to do it. But now I find that even I'm having it, and Facebook came out with a smart list in which they're intuitively picking who is in these lists that they have self-created, which just makes me angrier. Like, who are you to say who my close friends are and who these other people are? So I think they've mangled the opportunity for the list. Not that it's really hurt them that much since people spend 2 minutes a month on Google Plus, and it hasn't really taken people away from Facebook to Google Plus. But this was just my jab at Google Plus.
So there is a way to do the friendless feature that works, and Facebook hasn't figured that out yet.
Oh, certainly. I mean, I use them fairly extensively, and like I said, 20% of my sample did use them, and so people are using them. Just they make it hard, which they shouldn't be doing. So, all right, thank you guys.